Today we are in Madrid for the fifth Enel Focus On meeting. We launched this format back in September 2016 in Rome. Then we've been traveling around and we've been to London, to San Francisco and to New York. The Enel Focus On meeting for us is a very important occasion to foster and promote discussion around topics that are very important for us, that impact our lives now and in the future. We launched this event, and we are very happy that you're all here. So first of all, let me thank you. Some of you have been traveled from far away. We have people here from Argentina, from Brazil, from Peru, from Colombia, and of course Russia, Romania, and Italy, and Spain, of course. Today we are going to focus on sustainable solutions for the energy and power industry. And this is a very, very key topic for Enel. Why? Because we are really committed to be decarbonized by 2050 by embracing technology, innovation, and sustainable development. We are going to talk here today with our special guest, Alexis Madrigal, who has been traveling from San Francisco, especially for us, and he's going to give us his special vision about his futuristic vision and also historical perspective on really business potential on green technology. But before, I think since it's an amazing group of people, I really would like to have a quick self-intro round so we can all start to get to know each other. So I would say we start from here. So what's your name and where do you come from? And where do you come from?
Malaga.
Oh, maybe we need a microphone, sorry. I think... Otherwise, do you mind if you pass around?
I come from Spain, Sevilla, Malaga.
Hi, my name is Jairo Strachia. I come from Buenos Aires. I'm a journalist in Perfil newspaper, and I have an online channel called Hashtag.
Hi, my name is Gemma. I'm from Malaga, and I'm from the Innovation Center of Tourism in Andalusia.
My name is Giancarlo Falconi. I'm from Peru. I work with startups and innovation center in Peru.
Thank you.
My name is Guillermo Mas. I am from Alicante, but I live in Barcelona, and I came from South Spain, where I am a business innovation manager.
My name is Sergio. I'm electrical engineer in Siemens Gamesa Renewable Energy. And apart from that, I write articles in several magazines about renewable energies and electric mobility.
My name is Thiago. I'm from Brazil. I'm the founder of Tecnoblog and Tecnocast. It's the biggest blog and podcast about technology. And we write about innovation, future, and the use of technology, our relationship.
Hello, I'm Simone Tornabene from Milan. I'm professor of communication strategy and I work with an independent agency in Milan.
Hello, my name is Pablo Martín. I'm from Spain and I'm a director of Corresponsables, a magazine about CSR and sustainability.
Thank you. My name is Leandro Africano. I'm a freelance journalist from Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I'm focused on innovation issues.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Antonio Serrano. I am the director of the Masters in Startups of Garrigues and as well the founder of Spartan Hack, which is a business center to create digital profiles.
Hi, my name is Stefan Junestrand and I'm the founder and CEO of Grupo Tecmared, which is a media company. We publish news and articles on daily basis about sustainability, energy, and new technology, and we also organize congresses with call for papers, etc., on these topics.
Hello, my name is Anton Chupilko. I'm from Russia, from Moscow. I'm a director for innovation AMC companies and board member of Russian Green Building Council. And for maybe 10 years, I promote the sustainable technologies via social networks and via different meetings in Russia and world, and have over 50,000 Twitter followers, and the mayors of the top cities in the world. C40 group. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Victor Capra from Romania. I'm a journalist, a tech journalist, and a social media specialist.
Hi, my name is Paco Prieto. I'm coming from Asturias, Spain. I focus on innovation and creativity topics, and I work in a company called Talento Corporativo.
Hello, my name is Santiago Villegas. I'm from Colombia. I'm a digital transformation consultant. And right now I work with Confama in the transformation of the libraries around my country into sustainable libraries.
Hi everybody, I'm Rudy Bressa. I'm a journalist. I came from Venice, Italy, and I focus on renewables and climate change issues.
Hi, I'm from Italy as well. My name is Valerio. I work as a journalist for 10 years covering tech and innovation, and I'm now working as a head of digital strategy for Forbes in Italy.
So, thank you, everyone. And I think now, before giving our microphone to Alexis, I would like to introduce you to Mr. Angelo Fraile, who is from Endesa. So he will give us a brief idea of what Endesa is committed at the moment and about the brand. So I leave you the stage to Angelo.
Okay. Thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like again to welcome you to our headquarters of Endesa, and also to thank you for the time you are spending with us, which is very important for us, and also for letting us share with you the thoughts we have on sustainability, on the challenges we're facing, and how we're trying to give the right answer to those challenges. Actually, it's a challenge itself for me to go through this in just 5 minutes and not to take time from Alexis, which I know will be much smarter and deeper in the analysis. But well, when we talk about Endesa, part of Enel Group, we're talking about companies that have a very long history. In our case, we could go back to 1944 when it was founded Endesa. And it's a history of trying to find smart solutions, best-in-class technological advances to give the right answer to the challenges, the big challenges our societies are facing in that moment. But I wouldn't like to go back to 1944 because it could take, the whole evening. So I just wanted to give you, for those of you who are not familiar to Endesa, a brief overview on us, just to let you know who we are. We are the main operator in the electric sector in Spain and the second largest in Portugal. Some figures, we are 10,000 employees, a little bit more than 11 million customers. We have generation, distribution, and commercialization. So we have around 24 terabytes in installed capacity. Around 70 gigawatts hour produced last year, and around 316, more or less, electric networks. But coming back to, just very briefly, to challenges, we have a lot of challenges out there, and you know about them. We have climate change, we have air pollution, we have natural resources scarcity. We have also the problem of access to electricity for a lot of people that still don't have access to healthy electricity. And we also have this movement of people going to cities. So we have more and more citizens that are more and more capable of organizing themselves, of sharing knowledge, and you are very important also in that. So this is important also for us, because when we're talking about innovation right now, it is not just the innovation that the innovation team can do in Enel. It's the innovation that the whole company can do, but also the innovation that we can bring to the company. And I'm sure that you'll probably be told about this in the visit you're going to be having. So we have a lot of challenges. If we translate, because also technology, as you know, is more and more universal, accessible, affordable, and the maturity curve is sharper every day. So if we translate this into our business, what we find is that we have to go to the decarbonization. We have to go to a new energy model, which is based in the electrification of the society, as we understand that this is the most efficient, not emitting when consuming, and also the most capable of integrating renewable origins source of energy. So we should have to go to a world which is fully electrified with electricity that is 100% renewable. And then we should be having also an increasing active consumer that, as you perfectly know, goes into the prosumer. So probably our role there, and we're investing in that. If you see our business plans, the business plan of Endesa, the business plan of Enel, is to invest in renewables and to invest in making our networks intelligent enough to enable consumers to manage their electricity. I don't want to go much farther on that ideas because I think that maybe Alexis is going to go there, but that's the society in which we are seeing, and it's starting now. And we want to be there, and that's why our industrial plan goes that way. And the most important thing for me, which, you know, I'm a sustainability guy, is that we're not talking any longer about sustainability and industrial plan. What we are talking is that when we do our industrial plan, we have to integrate social, environmental, and ethic concerns and expectations from our shareholders, because that's the only way we are sure that, and we believe, we can ensure long-term value. And we do that, as I've been telling you, when we do our business plan, when we take commitments with the SDGs, with the SDG 13, saying that we're going to be zero emission in 2050, but also establishing intermediate targets for reaching that. Also, when we are setting targets for access to energy, we are setting a target for the whole group of 3 million. So we're doing that by setting clear targets, and also about investment in renewables and in intelligent networks. But we're also doing that, and I would like to finish with that, when we do it in the field. So what we're doing right now is that whenever we are planning to do a new plant, a new installation, it's not just that we look at financial cold numbers. We have to create a creating shared value action plan together with the local community so that we're sure that we are integrating the local expectations too when we are planning our business, so that we are really getting profits for us, for our shareholders, which is very important, but also we are creating positive impact where we are. That's the way we see. So this is not longer about business and sustainability. Our view is that unless whether you have sustainable business or you don't have business. And in that way, being open to the society and to things that can come from abroad is also very important for us. So I will be very happy to share with you all your ideas on that. Okay, so welcome again, and I'll leave. I don't know if it's in 5 or 7 minutes.
No, it's perfect. Thank you, Uncle. Thank you. And we think that now is time to introduce our guest, Alexis Madrigal.
Hi. Everyone, I'm Alexis Madrigal. I come to you from San Francisco. I flew in yesterday, and I somehow am not jet lagged. I slept like straight through the night, like a normal human being last night. And my presentation should be up here shortly, but I'll tell you a little bit about how it's structured. So it's basically 4 questions. 4 questions about the future of power around the globe, and the way that technology and innovation will be woven into the energy that we use in the future. So the reason I decided to do it as sort of questions is that I know we have a lot of valuable expertise in the room, and after I'm done talking, we're actually going to be able to have a discussion that I'm going to moderate, and we're going to be able to sort of discuss these questions and those that come up for all of you. And the reason is, I mean, I'm a journalist, and this is what journalists do, right? We ask questions. I mean, that's the way that we're. See if this thing's working yet. No? Maybe not. Someone want to check that out? Oh, okay. Here, I'll let you do that then. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. There it is. We ask questions, and then we tell stories. And the reason we tell stories is that they're a way of helping us like structure what are really complex systems and ideas into things that we can actually remember. So I know a bunch of you were on the tour. We went to like this sort of operations room where they've got all these energy markets. They have the generation sources. They've got the sort of mechanical batteries that are these pumping stations. All that stuff is very confusing for people who don't work inside the energy industry. And hopefully some of the stories I tell you today will help you sort of understand where those things evolved from. We're going to slide back and forth in time a little bit too. There's a futurist named Kevin Kelly who I worked with at Wired Magazine. And he oftentimes said, as far forward as you want to look twice as far back. So if we're going to look out 50 years, we're probably going to go back about 100 years too. Just a little bit about me for those who are not familiar with my work. Started my career in journalism at Wired magazine there in San Francisco. Went over to the Atlantic where I ran all of our technology, science, and health coverage. For those who aren't familiar with the Atlantic magazine, it was sort of it's one of the longest running magazines in America. It's been around for over 150 years, seen as very influential within the US government as well as sort of broadly in the US. I also made a podcast called Containers, which is really an attempt to reckon with how trade has changed the world and how artificial intelligence may change trade. And of course, the main reason I'm here is I wrote a book about renewable energy technologies called Powering the Dream, which really launched me into kind of thinking about all these systems and how the world really worked beneath just being able to flip on your lights. I also spent a little bit of time as a sort of a wannabe historian, a very history-centered mind, and so I spent time at Berkeley at the Center for Science, Technology, Medicine, Society, studying the history of energy technology, and then I more recently have been a visitor at the Berkman Klein Center for the Internet and Society at Harvard. Let's go into the first question. So when I first got interested in energy issues, I started to wonder, why is it that wind energy is somehow associated with sort of the left in politics? How is it that, given that there were many experiments in solar and wind technology all the way through the 20th century, it still produced just a small amount of the total power for any country, really? And as I dug through these sort of mountains of history around how the world has been powered, I kept finding that the 1970s were an incredible explosion of ideas. I mean, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is the OPEC oil embargo, which ended up sparking all kinds of energy innovation. And two was people just kind of realized the world had limits, that natural resources were not endless. And so during the 1970s, all these people started to reconsider how energy technology worked. And yet when you go and you read now, particularly in the US, but I think across the world, about what was going on during that time period, essentially what you hear is there was just a bunch of hippies playing with solar hot tubs and old windmills. And I think that actually started a lot of people thinking the wrong way about renewable energy technology, that it shouldn't be something that's associated with any particular part of the political spectrum, but that a broad variety of people have actually contributed to the development of these technologies. And I'm going to walk through some of them with you guys now. So I call it the 4 Ts. Back in this time period in the US, people would talk about the 4 Ps of pollution. They were the ways that people sort of tried to deal with all the new environmental problems that people were having after the sort of prosperity of the post-World War II era. And the first T here in the 1970s would be the transcendentalists. So these are the people most people think of when they think of sort of 1970s energy. These are people who tended to live off the grid. They tended to believe that if you changed the energy that you used, that you would actually change yourself. There was actually a path that people would take across the United States visiting these different communes and off-grid places that were doing kind of one-off research. There was a guy named John Nahr who was a photographer who worked with Norman Mailer and Andy Warhol, and he decided he was going to go walk this trail. And he wrote a book called Design for a Limited Planet, where he visited person after person who said things like, this home means that I'm in touch with nature because all the energy we use is provided by the sun. Just all kinds of people who basically thought that the only way that you could make change in society was changing yourself, and the only way you could change yourself was to change the energy that you used. By and large, most of these places are gone. As it turns out, this is really hard research to do on a commune in the middle of nowhere in the United States. And so mostly what we can take from the transcendentalists is just that you did need massive change. Like the planet did have to change. We needed new ways of living, and we needed new ways of getting the energy that we need. There's kind of an associated group. Is anybody in this room familiar with this, the Whole Earth Catalog? Oh, it's fascinating. So the Whole Earth Catalog, this is new information, was an incredible hit in the late 1960s in America, sold several million copies, and was incredibly influential for people who were looking for ways to think about the environment and the world that were sort of not communist or capitalist, that weren't sort of really high technology and also weren't sort of abandoning technology. They tried to chart this other path. And what they focused on was the idea of tools. As you can see it here, access to tools. And the reason that was important for people was that tools were sort of the thing that was perfectly matched to the job, right? So for them, the best tools were things that you could use forever. So like pliers, right? They'd find the best pliers and they would actually put it in the thing. They'd tell you, here's where to get the best pliers. Here's who makes the best axe. Problem is with something like, solar photovoltaics, right? Solar panels. They have to get better, right? That's the point of them. And so there isn't like sort of a perfect solar panel that you could just use for all time. You need this sort of sense of development. One interesting thing about these guys, Steve Jobs said this was his favorite book. It's really kind of a big fat magazine. He said it's his favorite magazine. And a lot of these people went on to help found the internet. So there's a great book called From Counterculture to Cyberculture, which basically traces how this way of thinking, that individual people using tools in networks could in fact sort of change the world. And those people came together to do things like create Apple Computer, create the sort of precursors to the modern web. There was a place called the Whole Earth Electronic Link, otherwise known as the WELL, which was probably the most influential online community. And these people basically moved into the digital space, and we'll see why that's important in a second. This is probably the least heralded story in the history of solar energy, which is that if you really think about how, in particular, solar photovoltaics came to be in the market, there's a few things that happen. One is Bell Labs, which was the huge American telephone company, put a lot of research in R&D. So you have one, it was the preeminent American research institution around some of these things. They put out one of the earliest solar panels. From there, it goes into the space program. So then you have sort of NASA, as well as sort of international partners in space, who go on to continue developing solar photovoltaics. Again, these are like big, heavy metal R&D programs. And then you get to a point in the 1970s where basically all the solar power companies get bought up by the oil companies. So some of the key development that ever happened, some of the most important development that ever happened in the history of solar energy happened inside oil companies. One reason is they had a built-in market for it, which were the oil rigs that were out in the middle of nowhere. They wanted to have a clean source of lighting power out there. And in fact, they turned to solar panels, were able to drive down the price a lot, were able to start scaling these technologies. And they become basically the foundational technological people in sort of the modern solar panel as we came to know it. The last group here in the 1970s is another not quite as heralded story. This is a guy named Rosenberg. He was a famed physicist at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab in California, about a mile from where I live. And he and a bunch of other physicists had been coming to Europe a lot because there were European physicists that they collaborated with. And one thing they realized is that Europeans had great lives, a lot like American lives, and they were also using half as much energy as people in the United States. And in the wake of the oil embargo, when everyone is struggling, like where is the leadership on energy? How do we come up with new solutions? These physicists all got together, people who had not previously been involved in energy in any way, and they said, let's learn this system. Let's figure out how this works. And they had remarkable success, particularly in breaking this link that people had between the amount of energy that you used and sort of the development of your country. For basically up until this time, people just thought more energy is better. The more you can use, the better it is, right? I mean, this was the basics of the energy industry, was that you must just keep using more. And one reason is there had been pretty much a very tight correlation between the GDP of a country and how much energy that country used. And so people took that and said, well, all right, if we want to develop, we need more energy. These guys were working from just a different set of precepts. They were physicists, so they turned to thermodynamics, and they said, for a given energy task, like you need to heat this building, you need to have this light provide a certain amount of light so the cameras can work, right? What's the minimum energy that we can use to do that task? They just inverted the way that people thought about what you should do with energy. It was that the minimum amount of energy to perform a task, to give you that energy service, was in fact the right way of doing things. Art in particular was very, very successful in the state of California and in the US more generally. There's sort of a famous story about him, which is that Jerry Brown, who was our governor in California, kind of a big political figure in the US, wanted to shut down this nuclear power plant that was out there, and it was kind of politically, he wanted to shut it down. But he needed to be able to say, well, we're going to be able to save that energy somewhere else. And so he heard that Art had developed this chart which showed sort of refrigerators, right? Refrigerators and energy efficiency. So it was like, this is the energy efficiency up here, and this right here is sort of the price of that refrigerator. And there was no relationship between those two variables. Essentially, energy efficiency was not a part of how refrigerators were sold. So what he said was, you could just mandate that refrigerators had to be a certain efficiency, and you would essentially save people money and still have refrigerators at every price point. Because he was able to do that, they rolled out a series of regulations, first on refrigerators, then on just about every other big good that people buy, big white goods that people buy. And if you look at California versus the rest of the US, you'll see that, unlike everywhere else where the amount of energy that the US uses keeps going up, for California, it sort of flatlines. And they call that the Rosenberg curve. And what's fascinating about this is that only some of that is the regulations, but it's a pretty good chunk. People have tried to figure out exactly how much. It's hard to figure out. And it's basically the work of like one guy, as well as his allies within physics. So you go back to this time, and instead of thinking of the 70s, this time there's just like hippies with solar panels and windmills, you kind of see that each of these different groups of people had something to contribute. The transcendentalists say, we need this planet scale change, right? The tool freaks were like, these mental and digital tools could enable these radical changes in systems working from the outside in, right? It didn't have to be that you would change the central plants. You could actually start on the outside. You could build something like the internet and then work in to change the things that were more central. You also know that like serious corporate R&D is just necessary to the development of these systems. There were a lot of people in the 60s and 70s who thought that solar power research should only occur in small communities, in communes, and it's just not how it had to work. And of course, the thermodynamicists say that the minimum energy for the need should be the goal. So when you think about, spin this forward to our present time period, one of the things you see is like, there's a lot that needs to change. Right? We heard today, there's a lot of challenges facing the energy sector. Most power still comes from fossil fuels, and yet we all want to decarbonize our economies. Climate change progress has been very slow across the world at policy level and elsewhere, and it can sometimes feel daunting. And one of the things I like to think about is, well, we built all of this once, right? And even though we're going to have to rebuild it, we have a tremendous capacity as human beings to build new things, to create new systems that work in new ways. And we're in the midst of that right now. We're kind of overlaying these 21st century digital technologies on top of these networks that really are originated in the 19th century and that kind of create the modern networked city. So a lot of science and technology scholars like to talk about the cities in the 20th century as just being formed of all these networks. And I want to talk to you a little bit about how that came to be. So this is a map of Chicago, obviously one of the biggest cities in the United States. This is as the city is growing, and this whole patch you see here was all of it that burned in one single fire in the 1870s. And you think about problems that we have. Cities at this time were pretty brutal. There's a historian that we'll see a little bit later in this presentation named Richard White at Stanford. He wrote a book about this that recently came out, where he traces sort of how rough were 19th century cities. And he focuses on the US, but it's true across the world. It was this bad that Americans in the early 20th century, so we're talking like 1910, were actually shorter and lived less time than the people who started the American Revolution in like the 1780s. And the reason was environmental pollution had built up in the cities. Things were burning down. There was disease all over the place. You've got fire. This is a map of, very famous map of the way that cholera would spread in a city. This was sort of a bad pump. So you've got these other pumps here where there's no cholera. You've got a pump here, and there is cholera. And people started to say, like, can we actually survive being an urbanized people? I mean, to shrink over 100 years, several inches, that's pretty bad. And to have lower life expectancies after 100 years of urbanization in America is also pretty bad. And all of these cities, as a whole, were struggling with the same problems. How do we have clean water? How do we have clean sewers? How do we have power? How do we have energy? How do we have information that moves around the city? And how do we get sort of public support for it? Richard White's summary is that there was a democracy of defecation. Everybody in the city was in trouble if the whole city wasn't covered by these networks. And so what you start to see is that this starts to happen. This is laying out in New York, Edison's people laying out lines, Thomas Edison's people laying out lines. Of course, at this point, you start to see the centralization of these plants. In the old days, people had their own plant in their house, and then eventually it goes to these sort of neighborhood scale, and eventually it just gets bigger and bigger, and you have fewer and fewer power plants, all supporting the city. You've got lights, you've got to build the distribution, right? It's not just about generation, you've got to get distribution to everyone. One reason I love this image, something to notice, like they would build these towers, which are sometimes called moonlight towers, and they'd put really, really bright lights at the very top. I forgot this thing, touch sensitive. They've got really, really bright lights at the top, and that's they just kind of couldn't figure out that, oh wait, maybe you wanted lights here, and maybe you wanted lights here. So you had to figure out every single piece of this system and how it would actually work. Water, same thing. You had to figure out, all right, how do the sewer lines work? How do you pump all these things? What are the connections between sewer and clean water? What are the connections between water and electricity and power? And one that people usually forget is first you have, telegraph is like already there in the 1850s, and there's a continued expansion of all of these information networks through every city. And that really creates the modern city as we know it. It wasn't just a series of homes and people coming together, it was a series of networks layered on top of each other. And then you get the digital revolution. You get these things coming in layered over the top of those pre-existing networks. So we've seen a lot of different types of new networks layered over. The smart grid is kind of the most obvious, means a lot of different things, but let's just say that it's putting more intelligence into the distribution grid and transmission grid. You've got fiber optics. I know that this is something that Enel is working on, and lots of other companies are starting to put in these very fast networks. Of course, something that we all appreciate, these 4G and soon to be 5G networks that will allow connectivity anywhere you are in cities at very, very high speeds. And actually, more importantly, will allow all the things that exist in a city to also be connected. And of course, there's the transportation services. One thing we didn't talk about is just you notice all the roads here. Those roads are going to be used differently, and they're going to be used in new ways. Basically, the cities are just becoming more like the internet. You think about the internet allows all this kind of communication. Well, we haven't really tended to think about dams or power plants as part of the communication network, but they're increasingly becoming that way. You think about resilience, we had this big hurricane in Florida. Bunch of the power grid gets knocked out there, but it came back much faster than people had anticipated, and certainly much faster than just a few years ago during Hurricane Sandy in New York, because they had put such an investment into creating more resilient networks, all the things that can mean. It's also adaptive and fluid. I mean, my favorite example of this is there are bike share programs all over the world. Anyone use bike share programs? Seen them in different cities? So normally the way bike share started is they'd have sort of one specific location, right, that had like 10 docks, and you'd bring your bike and you'd dock it there, and then you'd get it out and you'd go along. Well, now they already are becoming more and more fluid. They're already, now there's ones in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere where you just sort of stop the bike wherever you want. You go up to the bike, you scan a little thing, it unlocks for you, you just ride off, and when you're done, you hop off, you lock the bike, and that's it. So they become scattered through the city in a way that helps them reach more and more people and be where people are within the city. And it's just that sort of thing is happening with all kinds of infrastructure. It's going from being sunk into the ground, and it has to work in a particular way, to being able to be spread across the city and merely controlled more fluidly. And the last one, I think, is sort of harder to maybe consider the changes that may come from it. But all of these things out in the world that are attached to one of these networks are just going to start getting more computational. And what I mean by that is that you're going to be able to take their outputs and actually sort of perform operations on them. There's a funny example of this. So basically, every camera, you think of it as sort of like a feed. You think of the camera as just something, that entertainment, more or less. But every camera is also a sensor. So at one point, a professor at Harvard just set up a very simple camera in his class, and he trained it with machine learning to notice if there was someone in a seat or